Something has been shifting around you, not loudly, not with any announcement, but you have probably felt it in subtle ways, in the tone of certain conversations, in the way some people pause before speaking to you, or in how a room sometimes seems to orient itself toward you without you asking for attention. You may have dismissed it. That would make sense. You are not someone who spends time waiting to be noticed. The work you have been doing is not the kind that seeks applause. It is quiet work, honest work, the kind that happens in private, where no one sees the reflection, the restraint, or the difficult choices that shaped you. But something has changed. The work you did alone is beginning to show, and the people who notice it are not always the ones you would expect. This is not about flattery or praise. It is about understanding what happens when a person completes genuine inner work, when the restructuring that happened inside you begins to radiate outward in ways other people can feel, even if they cannot fully explain what they are sensing. What is becoming visible is not performance. It is coherence, and coherence has a presence, the hidden trait, what people can feel. Psychology has a concept called social perception. It describes how people read one another, often very quickly, forming impressions about character, safety, and trust. Much of this process happens beneath conscious awareness. People are registering more than your words. They are sensing whether your calm is genuine, whether your presence feels grounded, and whether your behavior aligns with your internal state. In simple terms, people feel you before they think about you. They sense whether you are steady or unsettled. They notice whether your presence carries clarity or confusion. And they can feel when someone has actually done the work to process their experiences, instead of simply learning how to speak about them. A person who has genuinely worked through their pain carries themselves differently from someone who has not. And that difference is visible, quietly but unmistakably. This is the trait you have been building. Through difficult seasons, you chose not to run from. Through grief, you allowed yourself to feel instead of suppressing it. Through relationships that asked more from you than they gave, and that you eventually left, not in chaos, but in calm self-respect. All of those moments shaped your internal state. Now others can feel it. They sense the steadiness behind your words, the calm that does not feel forced, and the grounded awareness that comes from someone who is not trying to impress anyone. That kind of presence is rare, and it did not arrive without cost. The pressure that shaped you. The kind of inner stability you now carry rarely forms in comfortable conditions. It often develops when a person is forced to become self-referencing, because the external world is not reliable enough to provide a stable mirror. When validation is inconsistent, when emotional dynamics are unpredictable, when a person must learn to stand internally because the outside world cannot always hold them. This may have appeared in different forms in your life. It may have looked like growing up in emotional unpredictability, where love felt conditional. It may have appeared in relationships where your sense of worth depended on how much you adapted or endured. It may have taken the form of loss, grief, or long seasons where you carried things alone. Whatever the shape, the pressure was real. But pressure can also create depth. When the outside world cannot reliably tell you who you are, eventually you must begin discovering that for yourself. That process requires self-examination. It requires honesty. It requires sitting with uncertainty instead of immediately escaping it. Most people never reach that level of self-awareness because their lives never demanded it. Yours did. And because of that, You built something internally that now has weight. The ability, groundedness, and transformation. What you developed through that process is not ordinary confidence. Confidence often rises and falls depending on outcomes, praise, or approval from others. It is tied to circumstances. What you developed is something deeper. It is groundedness. A person who has moved through real difficulty and integrated it carries a quiet understanding that they can survive disruption without losing themselves entirely. They know that if something falls apart, they will grieve it, but they will also rebuild. That understanding changes a person's presence. It adds gravity to their words. It gives steadiness to their silence. It creates warmth that feels real because it comes from experience rather than comfort alone. This is where emotional transformation matters. Instead of releasing pain outward or burying it inward, you processed it. You allowed difficult experiences to teach you something about your values, your boundaries, and the kind of life you want to live. You allowed hardship to deepen your empathy without turning you bitter. That kind of internal work is demanding, but it creates depth. When you speak, people hear experience behind your words. When you listen, people feel attention that is fully present. When you enter a room, people notice the calm that belongs to someone who has already faced difficult truths about themselves and the world. That is what people are responding to. The admiration that arrives quietly. You may not always notice the admiration around you because it rarely appears in loud or obvious ways. Instead, it often shows itself quietly. It exists in the person who remembers something you said days later because it helped them see themselves differently. It appears in the person who makes a better decision privately because they once saw how you handled something difficult. It exists in the people who observe how you move through life and quietly adjust their own behavior because of it. These are the silent observers, the quiet fans. People who may never directly tell you what your presence has meant to them. Sometimes admiration also comes from someone in your past who now watches from a distance. Someone who did not fully understand your depth when they were closer to your life. But they are not the center of the story. The most meaningful admiration comes from people whose lives are being quietly influenced by your example. People who become slightly more honest, more patient, or more thoughtful because they have seen what those qualities look like in someone who truly lives them. You may never hear their names. That does not make their response any less real. The loop of inner work. Something meaningful is happening. Every time you chose reflection over reaction, you strengthened your steadiness. Every time you chose honesty over illusion, you deepened your clarity. And every time you processed pain, instead of passing it forward, you expanded your compassion. Those choices shaped you internally, but they also created signals others can feel. People sense your presence and recognize the depth behind it. The admiration you notice is simply the echo of that inner work. Receive it without making it the goal. The real reward was always what it created within you: clarity, freedom, depth, and peace. Admiration is only the quiet side effect of that becoming. But the real achievement is the person you became through the process. You did not choose the cycles that were handed to you early in life, but you chose, slowly and imperfectly, to become the place where those cycles stopped. That is what people are sensing now. That is why someone you would not expect may quietly admire you. Not because you performed something impressive, but because you became something real. And that distinction changes everything. This is the inner calling. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. And I will see you in the next one.